Building a dream house is a big moment in someone's life. Let me tell you about how my marriage started to fall apart right after we reached such a happy moment. My name is Amanda, and I'm 33 years old. My family includes my husband, David, who is 37, and our 4-year-old daughter, Carol. We decided to build our dream house. Most people would think our life is perfect and full of joy. But that's not true for me. Lately, we non-stop about the house we're building and about David's parents. The first sign of trouble in our relationship was when we left Carol with David's parents. Both David and I work full-time, so we don't have much free time on weekdays. We usually looked at houses and talked about designs on weekends. Carol would get bored and upset when she came with us, so we often left her with my parents who live close by. But one day my dad got sick and had to go to the hospital, so they couldn't take care of Carol. I thought we should cancel our plans, but David suggested leaving Carol with his parents. I don't really get along with them. They're old-fashioned and think they can say anything they want to me, their son's wife. Plus, I was worried about asking them to suddenly look after a toddler. But if we didn't go, our house would be delayed. So, we let Carol stay with David's parents for the day. After we finished our errands, we picked up some fancy desserts as a thank you and went to pick up April. When we got there in the evening, James and Emily were happy, probably because of the desserts. We thanked them and left. On the way home, Carol asked about where her grandparents' room would be in our new house. I was surprised and asked her what she meant. She just talked to her stuffed penguin and didn't answer. She calls my parents Granddaddy and Granny, so she must have been talking about David's parents. I thought maybe they were just wondering if they'd have a room when they visited. Since then, David's parents started coming over more often, especially when we were home. We're saving money for our house, so we're living in a small rented apartment. Whenever they came, they acted like it was their home and wanted to see the house documents. If I complained, David would eagerly show his parents around, excitedly explaining everything. Why does he have to show them everything? It's annoying enough that they visit so often. Then, Emily starts asking me lots of questions, making me feel like I'm being interrogated. It's always me who has to answer, not David. For example, Emily loudly complains about our house plans in front of me, saying things like the kitchen's in the wrong spot and we need more living rooms because they're cozy for older people. She also questions having only one room for kids, asking what we'd do if we had another child. Then she jokes about the declining birth rate, which is a relief because I didn't want to talk about that. When it's my turn to speak, I tell her we've already talked to our builders and started the foundation work, so we can't change the plans now. I was a bit annoyed. Then she starts talking about furniture and appliances like she's an expert, saying she can tell if a room is cozy or if the furniture is good just by looking. She even said one room was bad luck and would ruin our work. Emily was so bothersome. I had jokingly thought about suggesting we make it a 2-family home and share the costs. But when I hinted at it, his parents got really upset, saying it was disrespectful to ask them to pay, and they hated the idea because it felt lonely. They left angrily, and I was glad to see them go. That night, after we put Carol to bed, David came to me, upset, saying his parents were just trying to help. I didn't mean to be cold, but his parents are the ones who are rude, always interfering and acting superior just because I'm their daughter-in-law. David says it's harsh to call their advice rude, but it's tough dealing with them sometimes. David told me he thinks I don't understand how others feel, and he asked me to take a moment to think about it. Then he just stopped talking and walked away. Yes, these are his parents, but this is our family and our home. We've never gotten any financial help from them, yet they always have something to say about what we do. How is that not overstepping? When David told me to calm down, it only made me more upset, and I spent the whole night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Time passed, and eventually our new house was ready. We were so excited to move in and start our new chapter. But then David suddenly announced that his parents would be moving in with us. He said his dad would take the bigger room upstairs and his mom the smaller one. I was stunned. We had planned for one of those rooms to be Carol's. I never agreed to have his parents live with us. David reassured me that his parents were okay with their rooms because they had already seen them. Apparently, he had given them the keys to take a look the day before we did a final walkthrough. David seemed to think it was no big deal. I was so angry and hurt I couldn't even look at David. I left the kitchen where I was trying to unpack and went upstairs. I needed to be alone, so I locked the door behind me. It was a good thing Carol was at daycare because of all the moving chaos. This gave me some space to think. With David's unexpected announcement, I was at my wit's end with him and his parents. I didn't want to be around any of them anymore. But we had just invested so much in this house. I knew I needed to stay calm and think about what to do next, for Carol's sake and mine. I spent some time alone in the room trying to sort through my thoughts. Later that afternoon, as David had mentioned, his parents arrived with a truck full of their things, expecting to be welcomed. They started complaining right away about how unorganized everything was. From my spot upstairs, I listened for a bit before I went down to confront them. James, Emily. I wasn't told we were all going to live together, I said, trying to keep it cool. I couldn't believe how emotionless my voice sounded when I responded. James looked annoyed and immediately tried to put the blame on me. I've already discussed this with David, and that should settle it, he said. But I stood my ground. No, it's not okay. I just found out this morning that you plan to live with us, and frankly, I don't want to live with you, especially after how you've been behaving. James was taken aback. David agreed to it. Do you really think it's acceptable for a wife to disagree with her husband? He retorted, implying that I was out of line. Such a disrespectful daughter-in-law. If you're so unhappy, why don't you just leave? He added. I felt a deep sense of hopelessness. It was clear that our ways of thinking were worlds apart, and communication was futile. Just as I was trying to figure out what to say next, David hastily stepped in, trying to stop me from arguing with his parents. Amanda, don't start a fight with them, he said. This isn't a fight. It's just me being criticized for being the daughter-in-law, and now you're blaming me again, I replied, feeling cornered. David still didn't get it. I can't live with your parents, I said firmly. What do you mean you can't? As my wife, you should be supporting my decisions, he insisted, completely missing the point. Before I'm your wife, I'm a person. You can't force me to just follow you blindly, I countered. Overhearing our conversation, James loudly interjected. I wouldn't want a daughter-in-law like that in my family. David agreed with him, suggesting that maybe divorce was the solution. Perhaps it's best to divorce a wife who can't respect my parents. Seizing the moment, I agreed, all right then, let's get a divorce. David was the one who brought up divorce, and I was the one who accepted. I silently hoped that my smartphone had recorded our conversation. Now that we're going to be strangers, please give back the $250,000 I lent David for the house, I stated calmly. James and Emily were shocked, and David turned as pale as could be. I explained to James and Emily, who seemed completely out of the loop. You might not know this, but David didn't contribute financially to our house at all. The entire purchase was made with my savings. Why was this the case? Because David, despite earning a salary, had no savings. We both worked and split our living expenses, agreeing to save whatever was left in our own names. However, David spent all his money and saved nothing. Amanda, let's not take it too far, David interjected. But I continued, it's the truth. And when we talked about buying the house, you insisted it be in your name, even though you hadn't contributed financially. I have the loan agreement as proof. Leaving David and his parents stunned, I quickly packed my essentials, Carol's favorite toys, and clothes into suitcases and bags. I made sure to grab Carol's beloved stuffed penguin as I prepared to leave this mess behind. I packed my car to the brim and drove away from the house we had just built. After picking Carol up from daycare, I headed to my parents' house. They were surprised to see me show up unannounced, weighed down with bags and suitcases. I know this is sudden, and I can find a motel if it's too much trouble, I offered, but my parents immediately insisted I stay. They were worried I might have acted impulsively because of Carol. But the truth was, I was determined to protect her above everything else. I shared the whole story with my parents, the final straw with David, and my decision to raise Carol without him. My parents backed me up completely and offered their home as a refuge. For someone working full-time like me, their support was a relief. That evening, I took the time to gather all the evidence of what had happened between David, his parents, and me. I transferred audio recordings from my phone to my computer and an external hard drive. Equipped with this proof, I used my time off work and weekends to consult several lawyers. Eventually, I found one I trusted and hired them. A busy week flew by since the day I left our home. Then, one day after work, I ran into David. Technically, he was still my husband, though I thought of him as my soon-to-be ex. I didn't want to engage with him but worried about a confrontation. So, we found neutral ground in a cafe. I quietly started the voice recorder on my phone before asking David if he wanted to discuss something. He mentioned the house, offering to transfer the title to me if we could call the debt even. He confessed he couldn't bear to live there, knowing his parents had entered before us. I pointed out that wasn't a small issue for me, taking a moment to observe him. He looked disheveled, his suit unkempt, a clear sign of his current struggles. "Amanda, I can't pay back the large sum I owe you, not easily," he admitted. I reminded him of his awareness of the debt size when he took it, and my suggestion to have the house in either both our names or just mine. He had wanted it solely in his name to feel like the true owner. Regarding the divorce, he claimed it was a bluff, not meant to be taken seriously. I stood firm, expressing my decision to divorce, not just over his irresponsibility, but also due to the unbearable rudeness of his parents. I ended the conversation, mentioning I had to pick up Carol, but he surprised me, claiming he would be taking her. His statement alarmed me. Upon returning home, I informed my parents of the situation to ensure Carol's safety. Later, a call from the daycare alerted me that James and Emily had shown up. I had previously advised the daycare of the potential issue, so they kept my in-laws separate, ensuring Carol didn't see them. When I faced James and Emily, they accused me of theft. I refuted, explaining the money I lent to David was legitimately mine, accumulated through diligent saving annual gifts within legal gift tax limits from my family and from selling stocks. This wealth was what I had lent to David, contrary to their accusations of dishonesty. I was taken aback by their disbelief that all the money was indeed mine. James and Emily had never considered giving David financial gifts, despite their love for showing off in luxury. They worked regular jobs without any additional income, which likely meant they hadn't saved much. It became clear they hadn't planned on supporting their son financially. "I'm sorry, but my decision is final. I'm divorcing David and will be taking Carol to raise her on my own. Please don't visit the daycare anymore," I firmly stated, then quickly left with Carol to my parents' place. Despite my clear message, David and his parents attempted to see us several times, resulting in confrontations that I captured on my phone. A month after leaving the new house, I had my lawyer send a letter demanding the repayment of the debt and a formal separation. David was initially resistant, especially regarding Carol's custody. However, facing the possibility of alimony payments and considering the evidence against him, he reconsidered. Eventually, I received the money back, won Carol's custody, and the divorce was finalized. The process took longer than expected, mainly because selling the house proved difficult for David. But in the end, I secured our independence and could start anew with Carol, free from the turmoil. At first, I thought David and his parents would settle into the new house we had built. However, it turned out that neither David nor his parents had the means to afford the $240,000 asking price. David had no savings, and selling his parents' old house wouldn't even come close to covering the cost. Eventually, they were forced to sell the new house at a loss, even after dropping the price several times to attract a buyer. David ended up borrowing money from the bank to cover the shortfall from the sale, plunging him and his parents into debt and forcing them to move back into their dilapidated old home. When David's sister, recently divorced, moved back in with her 2 teenage sons, the small house became even more crowded, housing 7 people who were often at odds with each other. They became a topic of neighborhood gossip due to their constant arguing and never bothered us again, likely embarrassed by their inability to provide proper child support. 5 years have since passed, and Carol is now thriving in 2nd grade. We live in a cozy rental close to my parents, who are a great help, especially on late workdays. Despite my initial reluctance to remarry, life has pleasantly surprised me. I've started seeing a kind man, also a single parent, whose daughter is in 1st grade. Our paths crossed at the daycare during drop-offs and pickups, leading to conversations. His heartfelt confession, and gradually, joint outings with our daughters. Recently, Carol mentioned how nice it would be if, should we ever build a house, each of us could have our own room and perhaps even get a dog. This comment came shortly after he proposed to me. While I've asked him to wait for an answer, considering our daughters, my heart has already decided. I reassured Carol with a hug, agreeing that if we ever build a house, it would indeed be a home where every family member, including a potential new furry one, would be happy and involved in the decisions.